Thanks everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Aaron Rosenblum. I'm the Health and Science Librarian at the Portland Public Library. I'll be your host here this evening. You can see that my name displays as Portland Public Library. So if you have any direct questions for me or technical issues, you could use your chat to just the hosts, or if you can see Portland Public Library, you could send it there and I can try to help you out. Tonight's event is part of our 6th annual sustainability series, which we conduct in collaboration with our partners at the Southern Maine Conservation Collaborative. Jess Burton, their executive director, is usually here with me as co-host of the programs, but Jess is away this month. Will be back with us next month, so bear with me as I mind the Zoom technical side and try to engage and listen to the program and get to all the comments and things like that. I think I can do it with your help. There will be a discussion and Q&A after the presentation. So you can feel free at any time during the presentation to put your questions in the chat or to use the Q&A feature you might also see on your Zoom screen. Use either of those to send your questions, either just to host and panelists or to everyone, if you don't mind everyone seeing it. And we'll get to them at the end. After Troy's presentation, I'll read out the questions, as many as we have time for, and can continue the conversation that way. So before we go any further, I would like to offer PPL's land acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is a simple way of showing respect and a step towards correcting the stories and practices that erase Indigenous peoples' history and culture, and toward inviting and honoring the truth. Portland Public Library would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the occupied and unceded territory of the Wabanaki, the people of the place where the sun first looks our way, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We extend our respect and gratitude to the many Indigenous people and their ancestors whose rich histories and vibrant communities include the Abenaki, Mullaseet, Micmac, Passamaquoddy, and Penobscot nations, and all the Native communities who have lived in Chuabunkeg for over 3,000 generations in what is now called New England and the Canadian Maritimes. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. So, with that said, I'm very pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Troy Moon. Troy is the Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Portland. He started his career with the city in 1997 in the Department of Public Works, working on improvements to the solid waste program. And he has worked on Portland's curbside recycling and our pay-as-you-throw trash collection program. He's managed several programs, including solid waste, parks and open spaces, and island services, but sustainability was always an important aspect of his work. And he worked on the city's first greenhouse gas inventories in the early 2000s and collaborated with a team of city and school staff to draft our Municipal Climate Action Plan in 2008, which I think is a predecessor to what we'll hear about tonight. And in 2016, Troy took the role of Sustainability Coordinator for the city, which has allowed him to focus his attention on high impact projects that advance the city's sustainability goals. Again, like what I think we'll hear about tonight. So I will happily hand it to you and welcome you, Troy Moon, to our sustainability series.
Great, thanks so much. I'm really excited and happy to be here. I think this is the 3rd annual meeting with the sustainability series, and it's always a great opportunity to check in and kind of give the state of the state, so to speak, in terms of sustainability and climate action here in Portland. So I do have a few slides. Hopefully you can see the splash screen here just to get started. And so, yeah, so tonight I definitely wanted to take it's been 1 year in since we started, since the council adopted One Climate Future. So it's a good opportunity to kind of check in on where things stand and, where things are going. So just for folks who aren't that familiar with our office, let me move on to, so just introduce our team. We have a really small team in the sustainability office right now. We have myself, and currently we have Erin Farrell, who's our sustainability associate. Erin joined us just a short time ago. She's came to us from from AmeriCorps positions. She's most recently worked with the town of York, where she was working on their climate action plan. So she has a lot of great skills and expertise, and she's been so far been an excellent contributor to our effort. And so we're really excited to work with Erin. So. Just more a little history. So One Climate Future, as I mentioned, the City Council adopted it in November of 2020, so we're just past 1 year. But it was really it was a lengthy process that took us to get through the plan development and final adoption. We actually started work on the plan back in February of 2019. And we consciously took a long time to develop the plan because we wanted to make sure we did it right. So we spent a lot of time laying the groundwork with research. We did a very comprehensive climate vulnerability assessment, so we could understand the impacts that climate change was going to have on Portland and some of the things we need to be concerned about. And really importantly, we wanted to spend a lot of time talking to members of the community. So we collaborated with our colleagues in South Portland because one of the things that's really unique about our climate action plan is that it's a joint climate action plan with the city of South Portland. So we spent a lot of time collaborating with our colleagues in South Portland and visiting with people in both cities. And between the two cities and our teams, we had over 100 public meetings in the course of a little over 18 months. We had public meetings in City Hall and South Portland City Hall, and we had meetings in small businesses. We had meetings in churches. We had meetings in parks. We basically went anytime people would have us, we went and spoke to people and really talked about climate action. We talked about the work we were doing and really got feedback from members of the community about what they thought was important. So taking all that input and all the research, we spent some time drafting up our final report. Again, ultimately, it was adopted by the City Council in November of 2020. Just so as a reminder, our program, the plan was established to meet our City Council's targets, greenhouse gas emission targets. So the Council pledged to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050. We've also pledged to run city operations on 100% clean energy by 2040. And we interpret that to be not just electricity. We also intend that to mean liquid fuel. So things like running trucks and other equipment. We want to make sure we're also decarbonizing those things too, which is, as you'll see as we go through the presentation, a lot harder than electrifying buildings. And finally, during the course of our development of One Climate Future, the City Council declared a state of climate emergency. And you can see in the background picture, one of the reasons why the council took that action, youth climate activists were very vocal in letting us and our elected officials know that climate action's really important. We need to do what we can to address climate change and make sure that we have a planet and a climate that is hospitable for our future generations that are coming. And certainly on the path that we are on, we're likely to have some unpleasant consequences for our future generations. So it just creates a sense of urgency for the work we're doing. And so as part of the program, as part of our climate emergency, we're striving to reduce try to accelerate actions in One Climate Future so we can do as much as we can to reduce emissions by 2030. Because certainly the quicker we can reduce emissions, the better the impact, the better the outcomes in the future. So some of the outcomes that we're concerned about, thinking about climate change, is happening much more quickly than people originally expected. So global temperatures are already, on average, already 1.2 degrees C above pre-industrial levels. And as you recall from the Paris Climate Agreement, our goal was to try to keep emissions to 1.5 degrees C globally. That was our, and hope, and certainly no higher than 2 degrees C. So we're, with with greenhouse gas emissions continuing, at high levels, we're already well into our climate, our emissions budget, and temperatures are rising quickly. And recent work has shown that in a lot of a lot of the world, particularly often here in the United States as well, that parts of our country and parts of the world have already exceeded 1.5 degrees C. And if we look at Maine, we can see that in fact we in the northeast of the United States are one of the places that are heating more rapidly than other parts of the world. So we're starting to see the impacts already. We see winter weather, particularly winter weather, much warmer on average than we've seen in previous decades. And we know also in the summertime we expect more and more hot, unpleasant, sticky hot days that are literally a health hazard for folks who have who are vulnerable to heat. So again, heat's it's happening quickly. It's and we need to take action to address them. And it's not just the land environment that's warming quickly. The ocean is also rapidly warming, and as many people have heard from work done right here in Portland by the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, the Gulf of Maine is warming 99% faster than other bodies of water around the world. So just we just saw a report in January that looks like 2021 is going to be the hottest year on record for the Gulf of Maine, and that's building on the hottest years that literally have been the last 10 years or so in the Gulf of Maine have been remarkably hot. So I got this graph from the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, just kind of to demonstrate how much heat is really building up in Casco Bay and the Gulf of Maine. If you look at the graph, you can see that really by around 2010, we started seeing the temperatures in the Gulf really becoming very much warmer, and the black lines indicate heat waves, and we can see that some years were literally heat waves most of the year, which a heat wave talks about temperatures that are higher than 90% of the same calendar days in the last 30 years. And so if we look at that, we can see that since 2010, every year had at least 81 days that met that threshold of a heat wave day. So, heat waves in effect are the new normal in the Gulf of Maine. And so what are the consequences for Portland's, maritime, industry, fishing and lobstering? Right now lobstering is going really well, but there's indications that lobster populations may shift as they did in southern Maine as the water is warm and becomes less hospitable for lobsters. But certainly warming waters also affect other parts of the habitat. You see more invasive species and different animals coming in. So our fisheries are really going to have to adapt to rapidly changing seas. And some people who have seen me speak before may recognize this slide. Of course, it's Dr. James Hansen. In this picture, he's talking to the US Congress, and he's telling the Congress that burning fossil fuels is warming the climate, and that we're going to have unpleasant consequences if we continue apace with the emissions going at the rate they were going in 1988. But if we look at what's happened since 1988, we can see that we've actually globally emitted more carbon emissions since Dr. Hansen gave his report in 1988 than in the entire history of the world before then. So clearly we've been going on the wrong direction. We see this is a slide, this graph shows data from 2020, which was during the pandemic, of course. So we see a little dip off at the top, but unfortunately we're seeing that going back up again. So any sort of ground in terms of emissions that we made up, so to speak, during the pandemic are going back in the wrong direction again. So yeah, we have a lot of work to do. So if we want to put this into a context of Portland, we can see here as part of the One Climate Future planning process, we did a greenhouse gas inventory, and we can see that we have in Portland about 840,000 metric tons of CO2 we emit annually from across the city, whether it be vehicles and buildings and industry. But we learned that in Maine, in Portland, emissions from buildings are our biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. If you look at commercial buildings and residential buildings, it's about 55% of our total. And if we add industrial buildings, it adds another 10%. So over 60% of emissions from Portland come from the building sector. So really that's an area that we need to put a great deal of effort to, if we want to make progress on meeting our climate goals. And so as part of the plan, we developed this policy wedge to kind of show, the policies that are going to be most effective at reducing emissions and meeting our goals. We can see that in new construction is the top little light blue bar, followed by energy efficiency and decarbonizing buildings and local solar, and then in the middle, the state has a law now that requires electricity on the grid to be produced by renewable sources. So 80% by 2030 and 100% renewable energy on the grid by 2050. You can see that that is the policy that's fundamental to achieving our climate goals. It's really like kind of the core and so we need to make sure it's not entirely in our control, certainly, but we need to make sure that we stay paying close attention to a state law and making sure that that we're accomplishing that, because it really is essential, and you'll see why in a few minutes. It's essential that we keep that policy in place so we can meet our goals. So in terms of addressing some of the specific sectors, we saw on the top of the little graph was new building policy. And in a lot of ways, new building policy is kind of like the low-hanging fruit in a way of decarbonization, because we have, if we're going to build a new building, we have the opportunity to build it in a way that has very limited or no emissions in the first place. So kind of the first major step that the city's taken to reach that goal of zero emissions in new construction is to adopt the stretch code, which is something we worked really hard on at the state legislature and at the MUBEC with the state officials who developed the building codes. We advocated for for the state to upgrade their building code from the 2009 energy code, which is where we had been locked for years. And it's not a very energy efficient code, so that needed to change. So we advocated for the state to change to 2015, but we also advocated for cities and towns who want to be able to adopt a stretch code. And through the work we did with the code board, we landed on the 2021 IECC code, which is much more energy efficient than the 2009 code, certainly, about 30% more efficient. So in July of 2020, 21, I should say, when we adopted that code, we made a significant jump in terms of how energy efficient our new buildings are. And so this is the code we're enforcing right now. So buildings that come to the planning department and need approval, this is the code. This is what they have to comply with. It's so probably it's one of the most energy efficient codes in the U.S. at this time. And I think from everything I can tell, Portland was actually the first city in the U.S. to adopt the 2021 IECC. So that was really cool. And we know how to build these buildings. So here's an example, and this is Bayside Anchor, which is Portland Housing Authority's building down in Bayside, and it's built to passive house standards. There's no combustion of fossil fuels in this building. It has, solar panels on the roof. The residents, have control their own, temperature in their apartments by, with heat pumps and it's great. They manage water on site. So this is the type of building we really want to encourage. We have the technology. So this is, I like to show this building as an example of what we can do and encourage our construction community, our design community to work towards this. This is what we need to be doing. So existing buildings are going to be a bit tougher nut to crack. So in this map, we commissioned a study a few years ago to try to determine what properties use what types of fuel to heat their homes with. And so this map shows single family, residential properties, mostly single family homes, some apartments, and what they use to to keep warm in the wintertime. You can see that even though we have natural gas in Portland, most people use oil to heat their homes. So, and of course, oil is a high emissions fuel. So in a way, in some ways, it's terrible, but it also provides an opportunity to make some pretty rapid changes if we can get people to move away from oil heat to electric heat pumps, or ground source heat pumps, things that don't use combustion. So we have a lot of work to do here. There's lots of little, I guess what color that is, sort of tan colored oil spots. Solar is certainly going to be a solution. We have a goal as part of One Climate Future to install 245 megawatts of solar in Portland and South Portland by 2050. So as we move into the future, we need to see pretty much any building that can have solar to have solar. So this is a start. All of these buildings are currently, all these solar arrays are in Portland. So the one on the top left is an apartment building, actually, 10-unit apartment building, and the developer actually put a solar array on every apartment has its own solar array, which is really cool. And top right is the Portland Jetport. It's a pretty good sized solar array up on the top of the parking deck. Bottom left is the city's Ocean Avenue solar array, about 1 megawatt array on the Ocean Avenue landfill. And the bottom right, it's actually my house. So I encourage more people to do solar. It's been working out really well for us. And we're going to encourage more and more people to go in that direction. And so one of the key ways we want to help people get away from oil heating, and this is sort of a scoop, we haven't really publicly announced this program very much yet. We'll probably kick it off kind of more loudly next week. But we're starting an initiative we're calling Electrify Everything. So this is one of the ways we want to help people move away from heating their homes with oil or natural gas and move to fully electrifying their homes, so we can stop burning fossil fuels and take advantage of that cleaning of the grid that we mentioned. As time goes on, more and more renewable energy will go on to the electric grid, and if we're using electric heating and cooling equipment, we're benefiting from a lower carbon fuel source than from oil. So there's certainly a lot of great reasons to go electrify that aren't related to fossil fuel combustion. Obviously, we can save money. Energy heat pumps are super efficient. They're going to offer you cooling in the summertime, which with rising temperatures and more hot days in the summertime, having a way to stay cool is going to be essential. We actually really see transitioning people, to heat pumps as a resilience feature too, particularly people who are vulnerable to, to heat waves, people with respiratory illnesses, or elderly people. It's really important that they stay cool and not overheat for their health. So, there's just a great number of reasons to transition to electric heat pumps and other electric technology. Another way we hope to address some of the emissions particularly in commercial buildings, is our energy benchmarking program. This is an ordinance we passed several years ago, and we've been, I have to say, struggling to implement it because one of the things that we really need is good data largely from our utilities, so we can have the building owners be able to calculate the total emissions from the operations of their building. So currently, we require any property owner with a 20,000 square feet building or more with a single tenant to report their energy data. But as soon as we can get CMP to come around and create a better platform, so buildings like these ones in this picture that have multiple tenants, once they can access their data, they'll need to report as well. So that will include, once we build the program out entirely, it's going to be about 800 buildings in Portland that need to report their energy consumption to my office, and then we'll use that data to help figure out emissions at a more granular level, but also it'll give us an opportunity to provide feedback to the building owners and provide them opportunities and information about how they can reduce their energy costs and reduce emissions at the same time. We're hopeful that CMP is going to be able to offer that data access later this year. We've had some good talks with them lately. They've demonstrated some new online platforms that look like they're going to meet our needs. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that next year we can really fully implement the energy benchmarking ordinance. And then just want to kind of pull up this slide one more time, because it really is, it's kind of really important to keep in mind. And showing that that big yellow stripe in the middle is so important, that we green the grid and make sure that the state is staying on track with renewable energy. But I also want to, like, in the bottom part of the wedge where the arrows are not pointing, the other 30% that's not built related to buildings, that's more of our transportation sector. And it's really kind of complicated. It's a little more complicated to talk about and think about how do we reduce that other 30% of emissions, because it's related to transportation. So it's really tied really closely to how do we build out the city and how do we move around in the city. So as part of One Climate Future, we really want to emphasize mode shift, which is a fancy way of saying we want to find a way to get people out of cars, onto bikes, onto metro, walking and enjoying the city without having to be in a vehicle. Right now, we know that about 87% of trips in Portland are people driving their car by themselves. So as part of our One Climate Future goal, we want to get that down to 60%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but moving percentages of people out of car, it's kind of a big task. So we're going to be taking that on. So currently, the planning department has a public engagement process going, asking for people to provide feedback about where they would like to see improved bike infrastructure. So I encourage you to check out the planning department's webpage where you can interact with that survey to provide some good feedback to them about what you'd like to see in terms of bikeways. And we're also working really hard to improve Metro. Metro has been doing a fantastic job over the last number of years, improving service. And I think one of the things that's been really a big win is getting when the Portland Public Schools made an arrangement with Metro to have the high school students ride the bus, because that's a really great way to one, we'll use the asset that's we've invested in terms of transit, but also create generations of young people who become familiar with public transportation and realize that it is a great way to get around the city. So in addition to mode shift, we know that cars are going to be a significant part of the transportation system for decades to come, probably. So we're really going to focus on electrifying transportation. So we've really started building out the infrastructure in Portland that will allow people to own an EV and not have to be concerned about where they're going to charge their car. So currently we have we've installed 15 network level 2 chargers around the city. We've revised our technical manual in the planning department. So when people come to the city and want to build any parking, they have to also install EV charging infrastructure to make sure that when people use their parking facility, they'll have a place to charge. And we are on the verge of announcing a major expansion of the charging network, including multiple DC fast chargers. And we're looking at some really great opportunities to create network, charging hubs in parts of the city where there's a dense population of renters, people who don't have driveways, who can't charge at home. So we're in addition to the fast chargers that will benefit both residents and visitors, we're going to be creating, and you'll hear more about this really soon, be creating network charging hubs where people can park close to their homes, make a short walk after they leave their car to be charged, and then go back when it's ready. So we're really excited to be announcing that very shortly, and it's gonna make owning an EV in Portland so much easier. So, and then currently in progress, we're doing our Recode. The Portland Planning Department's working on Recode, which is an effort to really build the vision from Portland's Plan 2030, as well as One Climate Future, into our actual policies to really make them enforceable. So how do we make design decisions and transportation decisions? We put them in our code. So our Recode process is exactly that. So in fact, Recode phase 1 was brought to the city council on the same night as One Climate Future. So they had a great night. The council had a really great night for climate when they adopted One Climate Future, because in addition to One Climate Future, they also eliminated parking minimums for most of the city. So anything within a quarter mile of fixed route transit, there's no more parking minimums. So people can invest dollars into housing people instead of cars, and also provide people incentive to use the public transportation infrastructure that exists. And also the city council also added the ability for homes, residential properties, to add 2 extra units by right. So if people have a home off the peninsula, even on the peninsula, and you can fit an extra home or a little room, extra building or 2, or add on to your building to add some more dwelling units, you can do that now. So that's really exciting. And we're currently in the midst of Recode phase 2, in which I mentioned is an effort to really align our land use code with Plan 2030, a comprehensive plan, and One Climate Future. So I know next week the planning department has some workshops, so I certainly encourage you to participate in those, because you've probably heard me say this before, that that Recode really is how we operationalize the land use elements in One Climate Future. So how do we build complete neighborhoods? How do we start creating rules that allow us to develop the city in ways that create kind of complete neighborhoods that places that we think about parts of the city that we really like, whether it would be the Old Port or off the peninsula. People talk about, like, Deering Center is a really it's a great little neighborhood hub where people you can live nearby to stores, to schools, to work. So it's really a kind of a complete neighborhood. And a lot of our neighborhoods are really starting to become really active and trying to activate their communities and associate new businesses with near home. So Woodford's Corner is a great example of a neighborhood that has really been coming together to help enliven the Woodford's Corner area, and promote more housing, promote businesses, and just more walkability and transit. So that's really the vision that we're trying to imagine other parts of the city developing into. So we're really trying to push in that direction. And then just a quick mention of solid waste. It's in terms of like local carbon emissions. Reducing waste doesn't make a huge dent in our local emissions, but there's a lot of great reasons to avoid waste and to reduce waste as much as possible. One, because all the consumption, a lot of the emissions are upstream. We don't necessarily see them, so it's still important that we reduce them. But also in terms of just better use of resources, better for the environment to reduce our waste. So one of the things we've done recently is we started our food composting drop-off program last Earth Day. So we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary. We've been kind of checking to see how it's been going, and it's been really well received. People, every month we see more and more use of the 5 drop-off locations. So we'll be kind of analyzing data and talking about this program a bit more in the next couple months. But hats off to Portland residents. Portland residents have always done a great job of reducing waste and recycling. And one of the things that I think is quite remarkable is since 1999, Portland has reduced its waste by over 60%. We used to throw away 23,000 tons of trash a year. Now it's about 9,500 tons. So that's definitely on the right track. So that's one thing that I think Portland's always been doing a great job. Not that we can't do better, but waste reduction has been great. And so moving on to sea level rise, we've been talking about mitigating emissions and reducing emissions. But we know from our climate vulnerability assessment, and as you've all been hearing in the news, there's impacts of climate change that are going to affect us no matter what. They're kind of baked into the cake at this point. And sea level rise is kind of the one that most people think about. We're in a coastal community. So we know that we have parts of the city that are really vulnerable to sea level rise. And so, in fact, last week NOAA issued a report showing that we expect by 2050 as much sea level rise as happened in the past 100 years. So that wasn't a huge surprise to us. That was, we used NOAA data when we worked on One Climate Future. So the numbers they were telling us about last week are really in line with what we had already built into One Climate Future. So you can see that by 2050, we're expecting to see 1.5 feet of sea level rise. And then, but that's kind of if things keep on track. But if potentially we could see, over 3 feet of sea level rise. And so I kind of refer you to the sign on the left-hand side, which is something we put up a couple of years ago in collaboration with a number of partners at the state and federal level. That kind of shows, what the levels of storm surge might look like. So if you see on the bottom part of the picture, you see a little tag that says blizzard of 1978. So that was how high water came up during the blizzard of 78, which is the highest tide Portland has ever experienced. So if we think about, a half a foot of sea level rise on top of that, it would go to the L. But if we think about if there were, say, 3 feet of sea level rise, it would be up, a storm surge would bring it up to the H. So we know that as sea levels rise, we're much more vulnerable to storm surges. In fact, we had a storm a few weeks ago that made the news. We saw flooding on a lot of the piers and other parts of the city. We were really fortunate because if the tide had been a little bit different when the storm surge came in, we would have exceeded that blizzard of 78 number. We would have had to change the tag and make it blizzard of 2022 because we came really close to missing that. It was just a twist of fate and just the timing of the tide that avoided a new highest tide. And just for reference too, I took this picture in 2020. This is what 2 feet. This is a storm surge. Oh, this is just an astronomical high tide, 2 feet above our mean highest high water. So, in 2050, this is kind of what we would expect the waterfront in Portland to look like twice a day at high tide. So, we clearly need to start getting ready for to prepare for this. So it doesn't mean that commercial streets underwater. It just means that parts of the waterfront are going to have to be used differently than we currently are using them, and other parts of the waterfront are in danger if there happens to be a storm surge. And so how are we thinking about dealing with that? And so in One Climate Future, we talk about developing climate resilience overlay zones to think about how do we develop the city moving forward in ways that take sea level rise into account. So what we basically are proposing is that we kind of divide the city into 3 parts. Tier 1 being the parts of the city that are most vulnerable to sea level rise, so things that are closest to the water, where we would expect that they would be inundated, by sea level rise, or certainly if there were storm surges, the water's edge, basically. Tier 2 is places that are less vulnerable, but they're still kind of low and they're at risk from sea level rise. And then the third is the rest of the city, because we really think about, as we manage, impacts of of climate change, whether it be sea level rise or more intense storms, which we totally anticipate a lot more storms to come with heavy rainfalls. And then when that happens, water runs down into other parts of the city. So we really need to think of the city as an organism, and prioritize development and require development in ways that don't exacerbate the problem. So this is a conversation that we're hoping to queue up pretty much in earnest later this year. I've been having conversations with the planning department about this concept, as well as recently had an opportunity to present to the planning board to kind of help prepare the way for this conversation, because I think it's been really good in some ways to see that the rising seas and some of the storm surges we've seen lately have really gotten a lot of media attention, and people are really starting to notice and recognize that it's really important that we start taking measures to prepare for what we know is coming. And then we know, we think we focus a lot on what's happening here in Portland, but I think it's important that we take a global perspective on climate change, because impacts are happening all around the world, and the impacts are not distributed evenly or justly. So I mean, in this picture, we're kind of showing where is climate change impacting people the worst currently. So we can see that much of the global south is already experiencing significant consequences from climate change, whether it be flooding from increasingly powerful storms, or incredible heat that makes it difficult to work outside, or just incredible rainstorms, etc. So people, particularly in Central Africa, which is the hardest hit part of the world currently, are really experiencing problems. And I don't think it's I think there's some correlation between the fact that we see a lot of folks coming to the U.S. and to Maine, to Portland from Central Africa. It's a place, part of the country, part of the world that's really seeing dire impacts that it makes it difficult to stay there. And it also exacerbates local problems and conflicts. So it makes sense that people are leaving. And the World Bank has done some studies and projections that they think globally people are going to be on the move at a large scale over the next 30 years. 86 million people in Africa moving because of climate-related impacts. India, both heat and flooding, causing people to leave. And then certainly South America also. And people are going to be moving around the world, and they're going to be coming to the US, and I expect to Maine as well. And and talking about the impacts that aren't distributed equally or equitably, in this map, we can see that Africa, if we look again at Central Africa, which is right in the middle of the frame, we saw that that's part of the world that's most impacted by climate change. But people who live in Central Africa are literally the least responsible for emitting carbon into the atmosphere that's causing the impacts. So really, we need to think about the social justice and equitable aspects of how do we respond to climate change, and I think it's really important that we keep that in mind as we move forward and think, how do we, as we're adapting and preparing for climate change, what can we do to help people in parts of the world that are severely impacted but had little to do with causing the problem in the first place. And then also, it's not just other parts of the world. The United States is becoming severely impacted by climate change. We see fires, certainly in the West, and flooding in Texas, with in Houston's experienced some terrible flooding, and so people are starting to move. It's becoming untenable to live where there's often forest fires and air quality impacted. So people are on the move, and I think we're seeing, anecdotally, we're seeing more people coming to Maine, to Portland, from other parts of the country. And I think we should expect to see that more. And something that even as early as 2017, Dr. Majewski from the University of Maine Climate Change Lab Center indicated that that's something that he was expecting at that time. And I think it's only, the chances, and we're seeing more people coming already. So it really underscores the need for us to think about, the complete neighborhood concept that is part of One Climate Future and Plan 2030. How do we build out the city in ways and provide more housing opportunities as we move forward? We're already experiencing a pretty severe housing crisis statewide. We're seeing it's not just Portland; it's all over the state. So it's really important that we think about how do we build out the city in ways that we can welcome more people who are coming here for, whether for a variety of reasons, climate change or job opportunities or for whatever. I think we're going to see more people, and we need to make sure that we're starting to build out ways to welcome more neighbors. And again, I think there's some advantages too. I mean, we know that Maine is a state with an older population, and we have a declining workforce. So there's opportunities as well as challenges. And so I think we need to kind of look at that holistically as we move forward. And in the end, our goal of One Climate Future was to make sure that in 2050 that we live in a community that that we enjoy. One of the things people love Portland because it's it has a great sense of place. It's a nice place to be. So we want to make sure that as we move forward, that it continues to be a great place to be in the face of climate change. We also want to make sure that we're developing it in a way that welcomes everybody and that provides all of our people in Portland with opportunities to participate in the new green economy and to enjoy the amenities that we have here in Portland. So that's my chat, and I'm looking forward to a conversation with folks. Stop the sharing.
Thank you, Troy. It was great to have that update. And I remember last year's talk, and just to see that, to see some of the same sort of info, but with these next bits and these next steps and where it's going. And yeah, to see progress and to hear you frankly say where some things are still in process and that progress hasn't happened yet. So I have some questions and our attendees have some questions. And let's see, the first one I see here. Someone wondered how many people were here. We've got about 17 of us all together right now. The number goes up and down throughout the talks, always on Zoom. So we're glad to have all of you here. And to the person who asked, now you know. You don't have the opportunity to look around the room and count when we meet you like this. So we have a question. Troy, could you break down the sources of greenhouse gases from Portland buildings?
Oh, great. So let me go to my slide to refresh my memory here. So residential buildings, so homes, about 22% of emissions come from homes, about 34% from commercial buildings. So that total of the commercial and residential together is about 55%, and then another 10% from industrial buildings. So that's partly operating the buildings, but also partly for industrial process. So we like to say about 60% of our emissions are from the building sector. Which is different than Maine. Maine, as a total, Maine's, transportation's Maine's largest emitter, but we're a little more urban, and so buildings, transportation is important, but buildings are the biggest part for us.
And when you're counting a building's greenhouse gases, is that basically looking at their, how it's heated and the energy that it's using, or are there other? Is the building's, trash output somehow factored
I
into
see.
emissions? I don't
Yeah.
know if that was their question. That's a follow-up from me.
Yeah. And it's largely burning fuels. So it's like heating with oil or heating with gas or heating hot water with natural gas or and cooking with gas. So really our goal is to, as I mentioned, to get rid of combustion of fuels in homes and buildings in general, and electrify. Our mantra is electrify everything, to take advantage of that greening grid. That big yellow stripe in the middle of the graph I showed with green. If we can get people onto electricity for appliances and for cooking and then for driving, and then we can take advantage of that green, the green electricity.
Great. And yeah, it looks like, so that question was from Susan, and it looks like, it was kind of about if it's fuel and other things, and it looks like we covered that. Then we had a question in the Q&A that was, what buildings are subject to the stretch code that you mentioned? And I'd be curious too, kind of what that applies to.
Right. So the stretch code is, the city's energy code. And so any building, any new construction or significant renovation needs to meet the new code, the new energy efficiency code. And so basically this, it takes, it's still within the kind of the code family that people are accustomed to, the international, IECC, International Code Commission or Committee. But it just takes, it makes the requirements stricter. It adds more insulation and requires appliances to be more efficient. So it's really any building that's being built or reconstructed in a significant way. So if you're like, doing some light remodeling, you don't have to upgrade your building. But if you're like doing some major work on a building, your home or a commercial building, then you do have to upgrade the whole building to meet the new code.
Okay, that question was from Jane. Thank you, Jane. And we have a question from Randy that says, thank you for hosting. I don't live in Portland and need to leave at 6 p.m. for a town meeting. So Randy is not here, but for the recorded playback of this presentation, they were planning ahead. I'd like to hear what advice Troy has for other Maine towns and committees who are interested in pursuing a similar plan. And they say it was good to hear about the process, and are there lessons learned and tips to share?
Yeah. I mentioned, that we took a long time to do the plan. And again, that was intentional. Because I think it's really important that the community participates in developing the plan, because it's really, I say this often, that, the plan, this is a people plan. It's not, we're talking, a lot of the things we talk about are, we need to decarbonize buildings, but really what we're trying to do is make sure that Portland remains a livable, welcoming city now and in the future. So as we, move into a future of climate change, having, a plan that the public participated in developing and knows about, it makes it that much easier to implement. So I think that would be what I recommend, is for other communities to start having those conversations. And I think one of the things that made this all possible is that people in Portland take climate change really seriously. There's a lot of people who are concerned about it. They share their concerns with our elected officials, who in turn tell us city staff members, we need to do something, we want to plan, and we want to start implementing it. So it starts early. It's the role of civic engagement, I think, is essential. And I showed the slide of young people in the courtyard at City Hall. There were several times when young people came to City Hall to protest in that way, and tell the city council that we want action. And so I think that's really an important thing. And then collaboration. One of the reasons that Portland and South Portland did this plan together is that climate change is not just Portland's problem. It's not just South Portland's problem. It's it's a statewide. It's an international problem. So we need to collaborate as much as we can. So we want to make sure we're implementing policies that augment and complement policies that South Portland's adopting, and vice versa, as well as state and national actors as well. We all need to play a role here.
And you said, what was the number of meetings you said that you had, public
We had
meetings?
over 100 different
Right.
engagements. So we had,
Sure.
and I think one of the things that was kind of fun about that too is we got to talk to a lot of folks that we may not have otherwise met. So we also had a really great team of volunteers who helped do that. So we had a toolkit that we created, it's a meeting in a box kit, and we trained a number of people who were to use it. And so we had volunteers literally, give One Climate Future workshops at their yoga studio or at their church or their civic club. So we did a lot of them with our staff teams, but members of the public did them too. So it was fun.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. And I'm just thinking, if you're a smaller town, to Randy's question, if you're a town of 7,000 instead of a city of 70,000, or maybe with South Portland, are we 100,000? I don't know, but if you could, maybe 10 meetings proportionally, you could reach the same.
Yeah.
Maybe you could reach more people in your community, because the way smaller towns operate.
Yep.
And it sounds like a lot that you had 100 meetings for Portland, but it could be an attainable number of meetings for a smaller community to make sure you get that impact.
It was a lot. I mean, it was a major focus, so we put a lot of effort into it. So
yeah, and worthwhile. I'm not saying it was too many.
No.
So I'm interested. First of all, I would encourage folks to keep adding questions as we go here. I see there's a new one, but I'm going to ask one of mine. So I have a vested interest in alternative transportation infrastructure, because I'm a bicycle commuter. I don't. You showed that picture of yourself with a bicycle helmet. I don't think it would be revealing too much about you to say that I think sometimes you're a bicycle commuter. When I see that 30% is transportation, and I hear that 80% of trips in Portland are people alone in cars, it just seems like such a wide open opportunity. And I know there's some planning processes going on, but I was wondering if there's anything else concrete or recommendations you're seeing from other communities that would in my case, get people on bikes, but whatever it is, get them out of their cars. Someone commuting. With our housing shortage, people are commuting farther and farther, and somebody driving from Oxford County to their job in Portland, forget about it. But for those of us commuting in town, what else can we do to get people on bikes like us?
For sure. So
Buses.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's a great question. And so I did mention that currently the planning department's they're getting public input on expanding bikeways and bike infrastructure, whether it be separated bike lanes or expanding the types of painted bike lanes, and then just what types of infrastructure do people want. So I think it's really important that people that the city council and the planning department hear about what people want. And then, um, so that, building that infrastructure is really important, but, it's also a regional effort too. I mean, we need to, Metro is a regional organization, Portland plays part of it, but, supporting the work Metro has been doing, supporting, the planning efforts that GPCOG is taking underway. We have, a lot of good, good plans. Like how do we, I think it's going to take, again, public support and engagement with the elected officials at the state level and local level to let folks know, to make, funding decisions and, design decisions that, infrastructure for active transportation is important to us. And so there are some upcoming, I know that at an upcoming Sustainability and Transportation Committee meeting, the counselors on the committee are going to be hearing kind of a synopsis of, because Portland does have a complete streets policy. So, Councilor Zara, who chairs the committee, has asked that we bring that, bring in the plan, explain, what it is and how it's been going. So I think that's going to be an opportunity to kind of see how things have been going with the complete streets policy. And, I suspect the counselors will have questions and send us with some homework to figure out some answers to. So that'll be a good one to stay close to. Typically the Sustainability and Transportation Committee meets on the second Wednesday of every month. So keep an eye on the agendas, and I think, likely that conversation will happen next month. So.
Great. Yeah, just seeing those numbers, I was thinking, well, I don't think I could live without a building in Portland, the home that I'm in, but I managed somehow to rely less on a car than I might otherwise. And so it just seems like such an open space to get people into. We have a couple more questions that came in. Helen asks, what upcoming opportunities for advocacy with local and state officials would you highlight? So you just mentioned some transportation committee stuff, but I don't think that question was specific to transportation.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's definitely the sustainability, like I mentioned, the Sustainability and Transportation Committee meets the second Wednesday of every month. So, keep an eye on the agendas, I would say. Those, we often take public comment at those meetings about different policies. And then, one important one important way to have advocacy is the Recode process I mentioned. So, literally, it's like the city hasn't updated its land use code, the zoning regulations, in over 50 years. So this is literally a once in a generation opportunity to, change our land use policies in a way that allows us to implement the vision that's in the comprehensive plan and One Climate Future. Because if we don't like, put the goals and objectives of our plans into hard policy, they don't get enacted. So I often get questions from people. It's like, wait, well, people built this building a little while ago, and why didn't they follow the rules in One Climate Future? Because One Climate Future is like policy, is like a visionary document in some ways, and it recommends policies, but the policies literally have to change before those can be literally enforced with people. So it's really important that we get this Recode. If we want to advance the goals of One Climate Future, we have to get this Recode process in a way that allows creates the policy that implements the vision. So I'd say next week there's some opportunities with the planning department to provide feedback. So I'd certainly encourage people to fully participate in that. And then, just yeah, I guess that's kind of the key one. It's like the one that's right on like on the verge of happening. So.
Sure. And we have a couple more questions, but I have a follow-up to that one. Is there any chance that by waiting so long, by waiting 50 years to revise our land use code, were there any really bad decisions cities were making in their land use, say 25 years ago, that we happened to be jumping over? Because it always, sometimes it seems like these things sort of, people wanted density, and then there was suburbanization and people didn't want density, and then we want density again for climate and other reasons. So are we dodging any bullets that we might have fired by revising the code in 1990, but that we didn't?
Yeah, no, I think yeah, I think I haven't really thought about it like that before, but I think that the fact that we're doing Recode now, once we've kind of established some ambitious goals in terms of climate, and thinking about the benefits of density and active transportation. So I think yeah. So if Recode happened 10 years ago, those wouldn't have been at the top of our minds. We wouldn't have literally tasked the consultants doing our code analysis to flag things that aren't in compliance with our vision documents. So yeah, maybe we are lucky that, and I think it's super fortuitous that this Recode process is happening right after the adoption of One Climate Future and Plan 2030, which came just a couple years ago. And I must say that the land use parts of One Climate Future particularly are heavily informed by Plan 2030, which is the comp plan, because they really are in alignment. So
great, cool. So we have two more questions in the Q&A, and one is, well, first of all, John says, fantastic presentation, Troy. Has there been any rollout of information to help folks simply use, consume, or get used to less as a climate mitigation strategy, I imagine?
yeah. So I think we need to do more in that regard. And so kind of our main focus lately has been on the food composting program. We know that our goal is, one of the goals in One Climate Future is to help Portland be a zero waste community by 2050. So we have to do a lot more in that regard. So again, I mentioned Portland's done a lot better than many communities with waste reduction, but we can do even more. Certainly, we want to promote a circular economy. We talk, and if you look at the One Climate Future plan, we talk about building a circular economy. So try to get people to reduce waste and reuse, and sharing economy is going to be important. So there's definitely a lot more work to do in that regard, no question about it. But so food waste, it's one of the things that a lot of people have asked for over the years is ways to compost food scraps. So we're really spending a lot of time thinking about that particular problem at the moment.
From personal experience, I think that composting has led to a lot less wasted food in my household. Throwing some food you didn't get to from the refrigerator into the trash, it just blends it with all the rest of the trash. But like throwing away a quart of strawberries that got moldy because it was in the back of the fridge composting it is more depressing. Even though it's going to become dirt, which is better, it's still, I think you notice more. Yeah. All right. Oh, we still have two questions because we got another question. So we have a question. Troy, how can we expand city bus service? For example, the number 8 stops early in the evening. There's not a convenient bus route to Scarborough. If you want to attract residents to public transportation, you must make it attractive.
Yeah, no, 100%. I totally agree. So as I mentioned, so Metro is a regional organization. So, Portland has, board members who are on the Metro board, but we're just part of the system. So we need to, continue to advocate for good funding for Metro, both locally. The city provides funding, but our neighboring communities do too. So we need to work on a regional level to make that better. I think Metro is. I think there's some great leaders at Metro who really are trying to improve service and be innovative. We know we have a couple electric buses. Metro has a couple electric buses that will be delivered pretty soon. But yeah, I think it's just keeping, and I think communicating with the state as well. We need Maine, in terms of funding for public transportation, is not in the top by any means. Like, we're in the lower tiers of state support for public transportation. So I think that has to change, I think, if we're going to make significant improvements. And again, just advocacy, letting people know that you care about riding the bus. And
yeah, and I've observed some responsiveness. There was going to be a change to routes around down on the peninsula, and there was a pretty rapid outcry, and I think they've at least pushed that decision off, because riders were saying, no, the bus goes where I need it to go, exactly. And I guess they heard that. And then what appeared in the Q&A was pointing out, I think, to the question of using less, was saying there's a Buy Nothing Portland chapter that is apparently active here. I can say that there are Buy Nothing Portland chapters for a number. It's sort of not by neighborhood, but it's by kind of area of the city.
Yeah.
And they're mostly on Facebook as far as I know, but you can look for Buy Nothing Portland and then it'll say north or peninsula or south. And you can figure out which neighborhood you apply to. And yeah, there's a thrifty, I was going to say business, there's a thrifty exchange of free items there, with, I think, the explicit intent of saying, don't, check here first before you go buy something. Let's consume less by giving each other things that we don't need anymore that someone else might.
And one thing in terms of buying, obviously I think it's important that we reduce consumption overall, but we also, one of the things we like to promote is local buying. If we are going to buy things, if we support local businesses and local economy, and that's really important from a resilience standpoint, because dollars that we spend with local businesses circulate within our economy, our local economy. And so, business owners, we're employing our neighbors, but we're also employing other, B2B type services. So a store will probably hire a local, accountant or a local graphic designer. So it's really by investing in our local business community, we're like circulating those dollars and benefiting more than if we're not spending them locally. So, and in conjunction with buying less if we buy local as well.
I can't help but point out that using your local library is an incredible way of never buying another book or DVD again for as long as you live. But also, if you are going to buy books, which I like to do, I love supporting our local bookstores. So we have those great options in Portland. We're lucky to have some great independent bookstores, and we have a public library that's happy to have a lot of things you like and get things you don't like from other or that you like that we don't have from other libraries. And what a good way of not having to cut down some more trees for some more books. Thank you to the nice attendee who said, bless the Portland Public Library. Yeah, and I think we've covered all the questions that came in, and I think I've asked enough of mine. I could go on forever, but I won't. So yeah, Troy, I wonder if you have any sort of anything that's arisen for you out of all these questions, or anything you'd like to add before I, thank you and everyone else, which I'll just say that again in another minute.
Sure. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to come and share these remarks, and I appreciate the excellent questions. One question that I kind of get often, that I kind of want to, like, people ask, like, what, we want to get involved, we want to like help do stuff. And so there's a really great group of folks here in Portland called the Portland Climate Action Team. It's local citizens who are really interested in climate change and who literally volunteer to, they advocate for, good policy, but they also want to help do things. So it's called, again, the Portland Climate Action Team. I don't know if any members are in the audience, but if you could, you maybe type in your URL or, but that's a great group to get involved with, because they literally volunteer to help us with our benchmarking program. So we have some businesses who like need some help to figure out how much energy they're using, so they have some Portland Climate Action Team members who volunteer to go and help the business owners do that work. Or as part of our Electrify Everything program that I mentioned, they're going to be helping us get the word out to residents who might benefit from that type of program. So if people want to that's a great way to get involved.
Great. I think I put it in the chat. If it's related to the Sierra Club, I found it and I put it in the chat. Okay. We have at least one person who said yes, that the climate action team is, some people are present here at the talk. Thank you for coming. So in that case, I would say thank you very much to you, Troy, for giving us these updates this year and last year and the year before. And we'll probably look forward to hearing what has happened by next year around this time. I hope we can. And thank you very much to all of our attendees. We will be back next month on the fourth Wednesday again. I hope you'll join us for our sustainability series. And until then, I would just thank everyone and ask you all to have a good and safe evening.
Great. Thanks, everyone. See you later.